Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your geographical location. I'm Diogo Plata. I'm Subsidiaries Pre-Sales Manager here at Panda Security Headquarters. And today we'll be talking about what is threat hunting and why do you need it. Before we get started, just wanted to give you some tips. During this presentation, you won't be able to actually or verbally communicate with me, but still you have on your webinar clients a chat option, which you're welcome to use and direct us any further question you should have about today's topic. So let's quickly start, and before we move on to the topic, let's quickly take a look at our agenda today. So first of all, let's talk about what is threat hunting. It's always good to have everyone in the same page who, whenever we're talking about a specific topic, maybe give you some definition about threat hunting, and then let's see why is it becoming popular. What are the challenges from the customer perspective? What is Panda Threat Hunting Investigation Services? And then a practical case example where we will be doing the whole, well, at least seeing the whole scenario when it takes place whenever a threat hunter actually investigates a case. Then we'll wrap it up with a quick summary, and at the end, so like I said, we'll have a few minutes for questioning and answering. So let's get started with what is threat detection? Well, mainly, this is our a broad definition that I got, and I'll try to summarize it a bit. But basically, threat hunting is the process of proactively and interactively searching through networks to detect and isolate advanced threats. In contrast to traditional threat management measures, which typically involve an investigation after there has been a warning of a potential threat or an incident has occurred. So let me highlight those two words for you, proactively and after. Now, the idea of being proactive, it's definitely a trend. It seems to be running through the InfoSec community as a whole, but also in the products. Another interesting model defines threat hunting as the -1 day detection, assuming that the first alert would be the 0 day of the incident. So a few key points when defining threat hunting will definitely be a proactive action versus a reactive approach to threats. First of all, threat hunting is not incident response, but they are actually bounded, meaning that what threat hunting is not is the ability to investigate an alarm that you receive, going back and try to find out whether it's a false positive, whether it's attack, or whether it's simply a configuration fault, and then remediate the action by applying a new security policy or a new firewall configuration. This is exactly what's not threat hunting, okay? So threat hunting, what it does, it covers what the tools in place cannot see. This is the exact idea about threat hunting. It's not about waiting for an alert or another signal. Rather, it's about going and looking for an intruder before any alerts are actually generated. It's also about following clues and ideas, not just cooked conclusive alerts from canned or known indicators of compromise matches. Another big difference is that from hunting or hunting outputs can later become new detection content rules. So at the end of the day, threat hunting is not a replacement for threat detection and alert response. It works alongside them. The idea is that if you can detect it with tools, we won't spend our threat hunters' time on it. Still keep in mind that threat detection was the traditional state of art. Now it is threat hunting. So moving forward and to have a clear picture of the differences between what is threat detection and what is threat hunting, and I say this because nowadays it's this is a quite popular topic as you might imagine. And one of the things we've seen is that not always you get threat hunting. Sometimes by threat hunting, solutions or even services are presented or provided to customers, but at the end they are threat detection. So let's take a look exactly what can one do with this Gartner's scheme about threat detection. So typically we're talking about a framework for detection that typically has either rules or algorithms or even, like I said before, indicators of compromise. Once you have a match from those rules, and let's go back again, these are typically rules that are built upon known behavior about consequences of an infection, so reactive measures. And when you get an alert, typically what happens is that you have your incident response team investigating the case. Typically, there are a lot of false positives. Sometimes it's just a matter of different configurations be applied. And then what they'll do is they'll filter out the attacks from the false positives and then apply the responding measures, the corrections you'll need to implement, the changes to the security policies. Whereas threat hunting, it all starts by generating an hypothesis. Now, an hypothesis, it could be either based on the targets of the attack, the methodology used to accomplish that attack, or even a simple malware family study from where you can get, or you should generate a criteria that will be used to formulate your hypothesis. Once you have your hypothesis and a few examples of it, so for instance, you could be building a hypothesis based on the number of RDP connections against the number of successful authentications of how many users. So it might be normal to have 500 attempts using RDP service of authentications, but not for less than 5 users. I mean, that's not normal to have 100 attempts of failures to each of those 5 users. That could be an hypothesis. Once you have it, what you need to do is look into your environment, try to find out events that match your criteria. If at this stage, it's quite common that you might need to go back, adjust your hypothesis, because what all you're getting is legitimate processes doing legitimate actions. So you'll need to do this in cycles. If it's not proven, you'll need to cycle back and then adjust your hypothesis. If it does get proven, then you need to pivot and expand the scope. So what this means is that you now have probably an event or a list of events from specific machines that you'll need to investigate in order to find out whether this again is, and this is exactly where you can actually couple with incident response. You'll need to find out whether those events are actually indicative of an attack or a false positive or just a wrong configuration. If it is an attack, what you'll need to do is gather a lot more information, try to adjust your hypothesis and build on it. You can have develop a new detection content, and at the same time, obviously respond to the incident with your incident response teams. Now, another thing that normally occurs at this stage is exactly that you notify the customer he has been attacked or attempted to be attacked and give him a report with full information. This is actually Gartner's description of threat hunting and differentiation with threat detection. Going further, why is it becoming popular? Notice that I'm not using the word new. I'm actually using the word popular. Why are we talking about threat hunting at this precise moment? Well, there are a lot of or several reasons to explain it. One of those has to be trends. So what we've been watching is that in the past few years, we've seen anti-malware solutions transition from a reactive perspective to a proactive perspective. Think about adaptive defense security module and think about the blacklist module that usually is implemented with traditional antivirus. Another example is phishing. So we got used to the idea that we needed to educate our users about how to to pay attention to which links they will click, or to pay attention to the domains of that exact same web page that sounded like or seemed like a familiar one, but it's not exactly the same one. And now what we're seeing is that there are solutions in the market that can help you fish your own users. Instead of being fished, you're now able to send them the bait, and then just fish them. I mean, teach them proactively, find out which users are actually doing the phishing, accepting or clicking on the wrong links, right? But also, this is all about solutions, but we've seen this in general practice. Typically, and if we think about the antivirus industry, one of the pitch sales would be just, okay, this antivirus will detect everything, will not consume resources, you'll just need to install it and forget it. This would be a complete reactive practice of security. Think about patch management, for instance. What you do is you would apply patches to correct errors, bugs in applications, and not for vulnerabilities, not for a proactive approach of securing your environment by having the most updated patches installed. But also from the customer perspective, I mean, nowadays what we see is that many customers are demanding and are choosing audits and penetration testing so that they are told whether or not have vulnerabilities, if they have configuration faults, if they have, well, at the end of the day, vulnerabilities that can be exploited and used as the means to compromise the network. And of course, some of these customers inclusively have their own insight teams in order to do this job. So as you can see, either from a solution perspective or practices, general practices perspective, what you see is that proactive is the way to deal with threats. Another reason is valuable traces. I mean, when we talk about threat hunting, one of the differentiators is that it relies on the assumption of a breach and traces, however subtle, that are left by attackers in your IT environment. And this is exactly one of the topics. Not always an attacker gets what he wants. Sometimes he attempts, sometimes he just collects information for a future attack, a future campaign, and sometimes it's just trying to discover weaknesses on your network. But always, or pretty much most of the times, you will leave traces behind. And these are exactly the traces that we're looking at with threat hunting. We're trying to find those, let me tell you a case. So if you see an amount of dozens of amounts of attempts to create a specific or to add a specific user to the local admin group in every machine, but it keeps failing because the credentials that the attacker has doesn't have permissions to do that. That would be probably a failed attack, but typically it left a trace that you were under attack. And this is exactly what we need to find the activity of malicious or of an attack before it becomes an actual disaster. Another reason might be exactly, or this one probably the most obvious one, is, well, the average cost of a data breach. If you take a look at the status of 2018, you can see that in the United States, an average cost of a breach was about or around $8 million. If you take a look globally, the average is almost $4 million. But what really impressed me is that it will take an average of almost 200 days, that's 2/3 of a year, to identify a breach. And in average, it will take almost 70 days to contain the breach. So it's a lot of time, so money is the object here. Another reason is that infections are dwindling, meaning that we are not, what we're starting to see less and less infections related to malware. So, and this is a Panda Labs information, and based on our traditional antivirus, you could see that in 2016, we had 40% fewer infections than in 2015. In 2017, we improved 70%. And this year's, we've seen, well, we've had next to zero infections reported. This means that on one hand, it means that there is less attacks based on malware. It means that if you take a look back, attackers are not using the same methodologies. They're not using a single file, a single infector compiled with everything they would need to actually have a successful attack. What they're doing is they're shifting and they're stripping all those actions compiled in a single file in several actions using several technologies, different methodologies to try to compromise your company. So what's the challenge? The challenge is exactly hackers or skilled users, if you'd like, which are not only increasing in number, but are also rapidly adapting to security modules using highly and newly developed tools, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, what we call TTPs. And if you take a look at last year's, there are plenty of examples of the use of exploits compromising legitimate tools in order to execute malicious content in memory, or even without the use of a malware, or sometimes using certified applications code which is already compromised and even before the compilation and certification. So bottom line, first of all, we're seeing a lot of new attacks based on or are taking place by hackers. And one of the reasons why you see a lot of more hackers is one of those would be governments. And nowadays, main countries, most of them, they all have a cybersecurity department with hundreds of thousands of employees, which tasks daily. It's all about developing new methodologies of attack that will allow them to actually go under the radar and compromise and get access to information without being spotted. Another thing we're seeing is that they are using what we call trusted applications, or if you'd like, legitimate applications, the typical administrative tools that you already have installed on your system or operating system, and by using it, they completely go under the radar. And what you need right now to this sort of attacks is an equivalent response to these needs. And this is exactly where threat hunting can help you. Now, what are the challenges? And when I'm talking about challenges, I'm not talking from a security vendor perspective. I'm actually talking about a customer perspective. Sorry. So there's hunting maturity modules that you can follow up and try to see exactly at what stage are you now. But typically, this is what you'll need. First of all, this will be your challenges. The first one, time. So typically what you see in our customers is that probably you're not just the IT administrator, you're also the technician or even the CISO, and you won't have enough time to do your threat hunting. Another aspect is that threat hunting actually requires time. You'll need to do certain things such as collect data, create hypotheses, and try to validate them. And then you'll need to know what to look for. So you need to research. You need to have knowledge about attack indicators, indicators of attack, or even indicators of compromise, which at this level should not be real an input, but you'll definitely need some threat intelligence feeds. And also attacker patterns. You need to know, have access to threat groups and try to know the most recent methodologies utilized in order to find out whether or not you are being or you have been tried to be infected. Another key point there is resources. So not only you need to collect them, but you need effective tools to do it. You need to collect data from your endpoint. You probably need to collect data from a firewall, from your proxies, and that's a lot of information to correlate. And to do this, either you design or develop your own tools. There are some open source platforms that you can use and develop your own tools, or you need to buy them. And in order to buy them, you'll need budget, not only for the tools, but you also need probably a team to help you out doing the job, not only the normal operations, day-to-day operations, but also the threat hunting part. And finally, there's the incident response. So at this stage, we've seen the challenges, we've seen what is threat hunting, we've seen the purpose, but if at this stage you do not have an incident response department, so if you are not capable of responding to the needs your IT organization have, why even bother to find out what's your if you're under attack? Because you don't, at the end of the day, you won't have the resources to respond to it. And all of this, obviously, it costs money, time and money. But the final and probably the most important aspect or challenge is exactly the skills. I mean, threat hunting is a human analyst-centric practice. It's not tool-centric. It's based on the analyst knowledge. You may have tools to help you in order to have an effective threat hunting, but at the end of the day, you'll need to generate your own hypothesis based on your own knowledges. So if you don't know what you're looking at, or if you don't know what you look for, you might as well lose much more time trying to do it than actually not doing it at all. So what can you do? If you don't have the time, you don't have the resources, you don't have the skills, are you still able to benefit from threat hunting? This is exactly the part what we present you, Panda Threat Hunting Investigation Service. Now, I'm not going to say a lot more about it right now. I'll tell you in the following slides. But the one thing I need you to keep in mind is that this is a managed service that it's included in our default offer. You don't have to pay more for it and not an additional fee, and you don't have to configure anything or ask to be enabled. It's already enabled and working since day one. So what are we doing? So obviously this is a managed services that it's based on adaptive defense, which continuously monitors the endpoint for security attacks by internal or external agents. And our target is to identify attackers that are using completely new ways or new mechanisms to execute their attacks. Indeed, we're looking for hackers, live, posing as system administrators, using no malware, no custom tools. And this is important because if they would use custom tools, we would be able to identify it using our Adaptive Defense Security module, the attestation service. But instead, they're using administrative tools, scripts, PowerShells, and other legitimate tools. But we are also looking for malicious employees or careless users trying to harm the company, trying to steal information, or just misbehaving somehow. And for all of this, we're leveraging on identity profiling. And our plan is to include also user identity and data control into the equation. Now, one of the things that you benefit with adaptive defense is the amount of data that we can collect from those endpoints. So what we're trying to do with that information is try to modeling the data in order to be able to profile three things. So we're modeling users, people, we're modeling processes, programs, and we are modeling machines. And by doing this, we are doing automatically, or what we're doing is automatically reducing the attack surface. We're helping to our threat hunters efficiently be able to identify in a quick way any sort of attack. So this is our threat hunting process. These are the components that we use. It all starts with all the telemetry that we collect from the endpoints. What we then do is we store it in what we call a data lake. And this is exactly what allows us to do a retrospective analysis and generate hypotheses based on this data that we collect. Once you generate your hypothesis, you can validate it against all that data. Try to find events that match the criteria of your hypothesis on that data lake. And once you did that and successfully, then you'll need to validate whether or not we're talking about an attack, again, false positive, or even just a misconfiguration. Once you actually validate it is an attack, what you'll need to do, again, collect more data, adjust your hypothesis, and generate a new detection content rule, which will be applied at this stage to what we call threat detection, so to our trigger definition, and we'll be able to apply directly to the event stream. Okay, this is how threat hunting can actually interact directly with threat detection, and ultimately that detection content rule may become a local contextual rule locally at your endpoints. So what are we collecting? These are the main events. It's not all that we collect. We actually collect more than 10,000 attributes per object involved in the execution environments, but these are the main ones. These are, so we're gathering the information about processes, creation, injections, files, again, creations, modifications, access to those files, communications, source and destination IPs, URLs used by process to download files or binaries or payloads, operations and on the registry, so creation of registry keys, modification of registry keys, and then from an administrative perspective, installation of service, the turn on or off of services, and these are the figures. These are the numbers that we actually use. So we collect information up to 12 months, and then we are able to collect, in average, around 4,000 events per machine. It can go up to 10,000 events per machine, but in average, we're processing 4,000 million events in our big data environments. We have 500,000 million events stored on our data lake, and we have been able to generate 500 new detection content rules. 4 billion applications already profiled, 2.5 billion workstations profiled, and 3.5 billion IDs profiled so far. So there's a lot of information that can be used and that our threat hunters use in order to effectively and proactively do the threat hunting for our customers. Now, what we have here, it's a practical case. What we'll be doing is analyzing from A to Z a threat hunting process. In this case, we'll see the study of it. How did we begin? Then the hypothesis generated and based on which criteria and the threat hunting investigation. It's called Bondat-the, the invisible worm. The first time we've seen it, it was actually 2013. But again, threat hunting can be based on a malware family. So this is exactly what our hunter did. He started analyzing this family and the characteristics that we had already discovered about it. So it is a worm written in JavaScript or VB-script. It is spread by removable drives. Typically what it does, it replaces icons on your drive by shortcuts or links. So whenever you execute them, what you're exactly executing is the shortcut and not what you intended to execute. It is placed in the start of the system so that you can have persistence. And typically it communicates, it updates its code using connections to a CMC server. It uses anti-debug, anti-virtual machine, and anti-emulation measures. It's highly obfuscated. It has the code encrypted in the latest versions. It's very difficult to detect statically or using signature files, for instance. It spreads throughout the network very, very quickly. It's also very difficult to disinfect after spreading. So this is what we knew before we actually began this study. And we actually based our hypothesis on the communications with the commander and controller. And also, we based the hypothesis on the type of concealments and type of executions and the type of events generated. So once we did that and we used the platform to do that, a new name would be backtesting console, which is one of the tools that our technicians use to generate hypotheses and validate them against a data lake, and that allows them to do a retrospective analysis to all that data. What we found out is that we had a match. We found a worm downloading and running PowerShells, and this time this was a new technique. We haven't seen this before. And we also saw it downloading JavaScript and downloading a PHP interpreter that then make another query to another web page in order to get a PHP code to execute. once we actually were able to knew everything about the attack and validate it, what we did was, because we did have the communication details to the CNC, it was possible to pose as an infected machine and collect all the last payloads that were being used by the attacker. And what we discovered was that it was using brute force on a list of sites with WordPress to Trojanize them. And also, curious enough, it was downloading and installing a crypto miner for economic gain. So one of the purposes of this Bondat was exactly to gather botnets machines in order to install crypto miners. And curious enough, they were also doing denial of service to the National Association of American Rifle. So the output of the threat hunting, and remember, there's always an output on a threat hunting process. It was the generation of new indicators of attack, for starters, based on the investigation that we did, based on the findings and adjustments that we found out after having a match, just like the PowerShell that was being used and wasn't before in the previous version. And then using that information, what we'll do is we'll generate new detection contents. And finally, what we'll do is notify support to notify our customer and deliver him reports based on the attack. Okay, so as summary, and just before we jump into our summary points, let me quickly go through the Gartner's Magic Quadrant about endpoint protection platforms this year's. And what we can see is that according to Gartner's, organizations should pay particular attention to solutions that include managed services like threat hunting or file classification. So pay particular attention to threat hunting and file classification. Moreover, Gartner also says that Panda Security's unique value proposition is the classification or attestation of every single executable file and process on a protected endpoint. There you go, file classification. And it is the only vendor to include a managed threat hunting service in the base purchase of its endpoint protection platform. So there you go again, threat hunting, Adaptive Defense 360, they provide both managed services at no extra cost, 100% attestation service for file classification, and threat hunting and investigation service for the managed service, the threat hunting managed service. So finally, let's go down to our summary. So what we've seen today is that malware is not the only problem to solve. It is the focus is shifting to include real-time attacks and hackers. So what we're seeing is the use of legitimate tools, administrative tools. They're actually conducting malwareless attacks, and attackers are evolving and adapting to tools and services. And what we think our customers need is continuous analysis and threat hunting as the solution. And to wrap it up, Panda's Adaptive Defense 360 platform provides all of this to you by just installing the protection. So finally, we get to the questions. Let me also tell you that you have my email address. If you want to approach me directly with a specific question about this session, you can do it. But otherwise, I'll just quickly check the chat and find out whether we have questions or not. So let me see here, questions. I'm not seeing any questions at all. Again, if you'd like, you have my email address. You can always direct me questions. Alicia, have you received any questions? I cannot see them.
No, the only question that I can see now is the one that it is automatically enabled. I suppose you mean that you want the random dresser, that you want the recorded version. We can send it to you.
All right, great then. So Before we go, I'd like to thank you. Sorry?
Are you seeing the other question that says that when will it be active in Sweden? Under, you should contact Panda Sweden so they can give you all the information. Nevertheless, you can write us an email too to global marketing, pandasecurity.com, and we will get you in contact with the team.
Okay, one thing there. Well, when will it be activated in Sweden? I mean, well, threat hunting investigation service, it's already activated for all with the default adaptive defense or adaptive defense 360. So we may say that it's already enabled. No problems there. Okay, so just before I go, I'd like to thank you for your presence today and also thank James Manning, pre-sales engineer in Panda Security US, as well as the entire pre-sales Panda Security US pre-sales team for their contribution to this presentation. Thank you very much, guys.
Diogo, you have another question? Diogo?
Yes.
The question is, how does service integrate to CM, like IBM Radar or Splunk?
Right, so additional to this platform, which is a complete managed service, we do have a CM feeder service, which will allow you to get a copy of all those events enriched by our threat intelligence down to your security operations center platform or framework. So it's an additional service that you need to enable in order to get all that data. And as far as it understands Ceph or Leaf format, data formats, it's completely compatible with existing CM solutions.
I think that's all the questions that we have. Thanks, Diego. Thanks to you all for sharing with us this afternoon. Please do not hesitate to contact us in case that you have questions or doubts. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, Diego.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.